So it's quarantine day 800, and the steering box rebuild kit finally came in. So we got these two needle bearings, the new ball bearings with one O-ring, 6 O-rings for this intermediate plate. There were several big O-rings. I already replaced a couple of them, so I'm getting into it. And this back plate cap, whatever this thing is called, has a needle bearing in it. Sits flush with the surface like that, and I had a hell of a time getting this thing out. I talked to the Stefan, the guy that makes this kit, and he said a slide puller, expanding internal bearing puller is what he used. You put that in there and it grabs onto the bearing. When you tighten this cone down, it expands these fingers out. He used one of those and put it in a press and then pressed the bearing out. In my experience, the bearing just came completely apart. So I ripped the cage out. I tried pounding it out with a screwdriver at first. That was my first mistake. This is what what remains of the race. So I ended up cutting it out. Long story short, used a Dremel to cut a long slit in it, and then rammed a screwdriver down the side back here. That breaks it and reduces the diameter, and then you can pound it out with a screwdriver pretty easily. So now that that's done, those seals in there are not getting replaced. I thought this was like a super comprehensive kit. I guess it's not. It's just this kit only came with the two needle bearings. It came with a like a squash plate bearing that goes in there, and the ball bearings for the actual screw assembly, and then a bunch of O-rings, 2 seals, and the little plastic cap that goes on the end. So I showed you how I got the last needle bearing out, the one that's in the main case. I'm using this 2-finger puller for the slide hammer. We're going to see if that works. Hopefully it does. If not, I'm going to have to rig something up to push it out in the vise, or in the press. So as for pressing this one, I'm using a 36mm socket. I know that's not the right thing to do, but that's the right diameter for what I'm doing. I'm putting an aluminum plate underneath the housing so that there's less chance of actually scratching the sealing surface while we're doing this press, and I'm probably going to have to sand it afterwards just to make sure it's flat again. This bearing does have a seat down in there. There's another snap ring, but it was not pressed all the way down onto it beforehand. It was only pressed down just far enough that the seal could go under the C-clip that goes up here. So we're going to have to be really careful when we're pressing this in that it doesn't go too far, because then it would be unremovable. Unfortunately, when I was taking the old ring out, the old C-clip out, it shot off somewhere in that direction, and I could only hear where it landed. It landed really far away, and it tumbled for a really long time down a bunch of hard-sounding surfaces. So that's gone forever. Thankfully, I had one that's exactly the same size. So that will conclude this part of the rebuild. This part will probably take you a few times. It took me 3 tries to get it right just now. Once the first 16 balls are in, they'll be about at this height. You should be able to see them on both sides, and when you press on one side, the other side should move. So the ball should basically be connected all the way through. They should be butted up against one another all the way through. They're not going to be like super easy to tap in there. I'm using some lubricant to make sure that they slide in there freely. You don't want to pound on them with a hammer. You still want to just use a tool by hand, so you're kind of light with it. And then the last 8 balls you're going to put into this little tube, close it up, and you can do this by hand. If you turn this upside down, you can shove it in there, but I've also seen people use a magnet wand. That kind of sticks all the balls in there, so nice and easy. So then that's what the tube should look like. And then you'll just take your cover, make sure it's facing the right way, just pop it back on there like that. And then we'll get to the assembly and adjustment. So the steering box is assembled, it is installed in the car. I'm not going to go over installation of the steering box in the car. It's very difficult, especially on the ground without a lift and without dropping the subframe. It is possible to do it without dropping the subframe. I don't recommend it. You're going to say a lot of curse words, you're going to smash your fingers, you're going to cut your hands. It's not going to be great. But it's in, it's done, it's adjusted, it's much tighter than before. I did test drive the car very briefly. I still have a whole lot of suspension issues in this car, so it is still kind of undrivable right now. A lot of the suspension parts are slowly starting to trickle in. So once we get the tie rods, the control arms, and every other bit and bob that needs to be replaced on the car done, we will be able to fully vet the steering box rebuild and see if it really did what it was intended to do.